trapped in the monster's grasp. I woke up to the sound of my alarm clock buzzing in my ear. I groggily got out of bed and stumbled to the bathroom to get ready for the day. As I was brushing my teeth, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I felt like I was being watched. I shrugged it off and went about my day, but the feeling persisted. It was as if eyes were following my every move. I tried to ignore it, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. That night, I went to bed early in an attempt to shake the feeling. But as soon as I closed my eyes, I was jolted awake by a loud noise. I sat up in bed and looked around, but there was nothing there. I lay back down and tried to go back to sleep, but the noise came again, louder this time. I got out of bed and walked around my apartment, but everything was quiet. I opened the door to check the hallway, but it was empty. I went back to bed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Just as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard it again. This time, it was a scratching noise, coming from inside the walls. I got out of bed and started tapping on the walls, trying to locate the source of the noise. But it was as if the noise was moving, always one step ahead of me. Suddenly, the scratching stopped and was replaced by a low, guttural growling. I froze in terror as the growling grew louder and louder. I could feel something moving inside the walls, getting closer and closer. I ran to the door and tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. The growling was now so loud that it was deafening. And then, I saw it. A pair of glowing eyes stared at me through a hole in the wall. I screamed and backed away, but the creature followed, breaking through the drywall with ease. It was a monster, unlike anything I had ever seen before. It was covered in fur and had razor-sharp claws and teeth. I was trapped in my own apartment with this monster and there was nowhere to run. I could feel its hot breath on my face as it lunged for me. I closed my eyes and braced for the impact. But it never came. When I opened my eyes, the monster was gone. I was alone in my apartment, but the damage had been done. I knew I would never be safe again. The monster was still out there, watching, waiting for its next opportunity to attack. I never slept soundly again, always listening for the scratching noise in the walls, the growling, and the glowing eyes. I knew it was only a matter of time before the monster returned. And I knew that when it did, I would not survive. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get out of that apartment. I packed my bags and left, but the feeling of being watched never left me. I tried to start over in a new place, but the monster seemed to follow me wherever I went. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was always one step ahead of me, always lurking in the shadows. I started to become paranoid, always looking over my shoulder, jumping at the slightest noise. I tried to tell people about what had happened, but they didn't believe me. They thought I was crazy, that it was all in my head. But I knew the truth. The monster was real, and it was still out there. I started to do research, trying to find any information about similar creatures. But I found nothing. It was as if the monster didn't exist. But I knew it did. I had seen it with my own eyes. I became obsessed with finding out the truth about the monster. I spent all my time and money on trying to uncover its origins and weaknesses. I couldn't rest until I knew for sure that it couldn't harm anyone else. One night, as I was going through old newspapers, I found an article about a string of disappearances in the area where I used to live. The victims were all young men, and their bodies were never found. The police had no leads and the case had gone cold. I realized then that I had been the monster's target all along. It had been watching me, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. I knew then that I had to stop it, before it hurt anyone else. I gathered all the information I had and set out to hunt the monster. I was determined to put an end to its reign of terror once and for all. I tracked the monster to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. I knew it was inside, waiting for me. I entered the warehouse, armed with a flashlight and a makeshift weapon. I could hear the monster's growling getting louder and louder as I got closer. I was terrified, but I knew I had to face it. I turned the corner, and there it was, standing in front of me. I aimed my weapon and fired, but the monster was too quick. It dodged the attack and lunged at me. I fought back with all my might, but it was too strong. I was no match for it. Just when I thought it was the end, I heard a sound behind me. It was the police. They had followed me to the warehouse. They opened fire on the monster, and it fell to the ground. I was safe, the monster was dead. But as I looked at the motionless creature lying on the ground, I realized something was off. Its eyes were still open, and they were not the eyes of a dead animal, they were the eyes of something still alive. Suddenly, it twitched, and before anyone could react, it lunged at me with renewed energy and strength. I was caught off guard, and it took me down to the ground with its razor-sharp claws. I could feel its hot breath on my face as it opened its jaws wide and prepared to strike. I closed my eyes and braced for the impact, but it never came. Instead, I heard the screams of the police officers as they were taken down one by one. I opened my eyes to see the monster standing over me, its eyes glowing with a sinister intelligence. It was as if it was staring right into my soul. I knew then that it was not a monster, but something far more terrifying, something ancient and powerful, something that had been waiting for the opportunity to break free and feed on human fear. I could feel myself being pulled into its gaze, falling into an abyss of darkness and terror. I knew that I was going to die, but more than that, I knew that I was going to be consumed by the monster, that my body and my soul would become a part of it, forever trapped in its never-ending cycle of hunting and feeding. I could hear the sounds of sirens in the distance, but I knew they were too late, the monster had won. As the darkness consumed me, I could feel it whisper in my ear, "Welcome to the eternal hunt." And that was the last thing I ever heard. Trapped in the monster's grasp. Echoes of the dead, a haunted hotel nightmare. I was on a business trip, staying in a hotel in a foreign city. I had been there for a few days and had been enjoying my time, but something felt off from the moment I arrived. The hotel had a strange atmosphere, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I tried to brush it off and continue with my trip, but the feeling of unease never left me. As I lay in bed that night, I started to hear strange noises coming from outside my room. At first, I thought it was just the sound of the city, but the noises continued and seemed to be getting louder. I tried to ignore it and went back to sleep, but the noises persisted, growing louder and more frantic. I could hear whispering and scratching, as if someone was trying to get into my room. I felt a cold draft of air and goosebumps ran down my back. The next morning, I decided to investigate and went to the front desk to ask about the noises. The staff seemed uneasy and reluctant to talk about it. Eventually, they informed me that the hotel was built on an old cemetery, and that some guests had reported hearing strange noises coming from their rooms. They assured me that it was nothing to be worried about and that it was just the sound of the old graves settling. But I knew that there was something more to it. I started to notice that the hotel staff seemed to be avoiding certain areas of the hotel, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I started to do research and found out that the hotel was built on top of a mass grave, where victims of a long-forgotten plague were buried. The remains of the buried were not moved properly, and their spirits were disturbed by the construction of the hotel. The hotel management had ignored this fact and had built the hotel without any proper rituals to honor the dead. That night, as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a voice whispering my name. I sat up in bed and looked around, but there was no one there. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but the voice continued to call out to me. It was coming from inside the room, and it was getting louder and louder. Suddenly, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder and I froze in terror. I knew that I had to get out of the hotel, but when I tried to leave, the door was locked, and it wouldn't budge. I tried to open the window, but it was sealed shut. I was trapped, and I knew that the spirits were getting closer. I could hear scratching and whispering coming from the walls, and I could feel the coldness of their presence. I knew that I was being haunted and that the spirits were determined to make me a part of their world. I tried to defend myself, but nothing seemed to work. I could see ghostly figures in the room, and I could feel their cold hands reaching out to grab me. I could hear their screams and cries, and I knew that they were suffering. I realized then that they were not trying to harm me, but they were trying to communicate something to me. I knew that I had to be respectful and acknowledge the spirits, and I made a promise to myself to never forget about the past and the people who came before me. I apologized for the hotel's disregard for their resting place, and I vowed to do everything in my power to honor their memory. To my surprise, the spirits seemed to be calmed by my words, and the room grew warmer. The whispering and scratching stopped, and the ghostly figures disappeared. I was finally able to open the door, and I ran out of the hotel, never looking back. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the spirits were still there, watching, waiting for their next opportunity to make themselves known. From that moment on, I made sure to research the history of any place I was going to stay, to ensure that I would never again unknowingly disturb the resting place of the dead. I knew that the spirits had taught me an important lesson and that they had given me a glimpse into their world. I would never forget the terror and the sorrow that I had experienced in that haunted hotel. I would make sure that their memory would live on and that they would finally find peace. Appeasing the spirits, a terrifying solo camping trip. I was on a solo camping trip, deep in the woods. I had always been an avid outdoorsman, and I was looking forward to some much-needed alone time in nature. I set up camp, started a fire, and settled in for the night. But as the night went on, I started to hear strange noises coming from the woods. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but the noises continued and seemed to be getting closer. I tried to ignore it and went back to sleep, but the noises persisted. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The next day, I decided to investigate and venture deeper into the woods. But the further I went, the more disorientated I became. I realized that I was lost and that I had been purposely led off the trail. I could feel something following me, stalking me, and I knew that I was being hunted. I set traps, built shelter, and tried to find my way back to the campsite, but I was unsuccessful. I was running low on food and water, and I knew that I had to act fast. That night, as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a voice whispering my name. I sat up in bed and looked around, but there was no one there. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but the voice continued to call out to me. Suddenly, I heard a blood-curdling howl, and I knew that it was not an animal. I knew that I had to defend myself, but I had nothing to defend myself with. I could feel the presence of something sinister getting closer, and I knew that it was coming for me. I could see shadows moving in the darkness, and I knew that I was not alone. I knew that I had to keep moving, to find a way out of the woods. I remembered the direction of the sunset, and I started to move in that direction, hoping that it would lead me back to civilization. As I walked, I could feel the creatures still following me, getting closer and closer. I could hear their howling and snarling, and I knew that they were closing in. I pushed myself harder, and I could feel my feet blistering and my throat burning. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. As the night went on, I could feel my energy and willpower draining away, and I knew that I had to rest. I searched for a safe place to hide, but everywhere I looked, there seemed to be danger lurking. I knew that I had to keep moving, but my body was giving out. I collapsed onto the ground, and I knew that I had reached the end. But just when I thought it was over, I saw a light in the distance. It was a cabin, and I knew that it was my chance for survival. I dragged myself towards the cabin, and I could feel the creatures getting closer. I could hear their howling and snarling, and I knew that they were closing in. I pushed myself harder, and I finally reached the cabin. I banged on the door, and to my relief, someone opened it. It was an old man, who lived alone in the cabin. He took me in, and he gave me food and water. He listened to my story, and he knew that the creatures were real. He told me that they were the spirits of the woods, and they had been disturbed by my presence. He said that they were angry and vengeful, and that they would stop at nothing to claim me as their own. I knew that I had to leave, but the old man warned me that it was too late. The spirits were already aware of my presence, and they would not rest until they had claimed me as one of their own. He told me that the only way to survive was to appease the spirits, to honor their memory, and to ask for their forgiveness. I knew that I had to do something, and I knew that time was running out. I asked the old man for his help, and he agreed to guide me in a ritual to appease the spirits. He told me to gather certain items, such as sage, crystals, and offerings of food. Together, we performed the ritual, and I could feel the spirits calming down. I could feel the tension in the air dissipating, and I knew that the ritual had worked. The old man told me that the spirits were now at peace, and that I could finally leave the woods. But I knew that I could never truly leave the spirits behind. They had left a mark on me, and I knew that they would always be a part of me. I thanked the old man for his help and left the cabin, but I could feel the spirits watching me as I walked away. I eventually found my way back to civilization, but I knew that I would never be the same. I had faced my fears, and I had come face to face with the unknown. I had learned a valuable lesson, and I knew that I would always carry the memory of my terrifying experience in the woods with me for the rest of my life. From that day on, I made sure to always respect the spirits of the land and to never take nature for granted again. I knew that the spirits had taught me an important lesson and that they had given me a glimpse into their world. And I knew that I would always honor their memory and the memory of the old man who saved me from the spirits and showed me the way to peace. Echoes of the Asylum, a ghostly encounter. I had always been fascinated by urban exploration and the thrill of exploring abandoned buildings. So when I heard about an abandoned asylum, deep in the woods, I knew that I had to check it out. I convinced my friends to come with me, and we set out on our adventure. As soon as we arrived at the asylum, we could feel the eerie atmosphere. The building was dilapidated and overgrown with vegetation. We made our way inside and started to explore. The asylum was massive, and we could see that it had been abandoned for decades. We walked through the empty hallways, and we could see the peeling wallpaper and the debris scattered on the ground. We could feel the weight of the past, and we knew that we were not alone. As we explored, we could hear strange noises coming from the walls and the floors. We tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the sound of the building settling. But the noises persisted and seemed to be getting louder. We started to feel uneasy, and we knew that something was not right. We could feel a presence following us, and we knew that we were being watched. We soon discovered that the asylum had been a site of horrific experiments and abuse. The patients were subjected to cruel and inhumane treatments, and many of them had died as a result. We could feel the suffering and the pain of the patients, and we knew that we had disturbed their resting place. We could see the evidence of the past all around us, and we knew that we had to be respectful and acknowledge the spirits of the past. As we continued to explore, we started to see ghostly figures appearing before us. They were the spirits of the patients, and they were not happy with our intrusion. They started to attack us, and we could feel their presence getting stronger and more aggressive. We knew that we had to get out of there as soon as possible. We ran through the empty hallways, trying to find our way out of the building. But the spirits seemed to be everywhere, and they were blocking our path. We could hear screams and moans coming from the walls, and we knew that the spirits were trying to scare us. We tried to stay calm and not let fear take over, but it was difficult. We could feel the weight of the past crushing us, and we knew that we were in danger. Finally, we managed to find the door to the outside, and we ran out of the building as fast as we could. We could feel the spirits following us, but we didn't look back. We ran through the woods, trying to put as much distance between us and the asylum as possible. As we walked away from the asylum, we thought we had escaped the spirits and the terror that we had experienced inside. But soon we realized that we weren't alone. The spirits of the patients had followed us out of the asylum, and they were still angry and vengeful. They started to appear all around us, their ghostly figures looming in the darkness. We could hear their screams and moans, and we knew that they wanted us to pay for our intrusion. We tried to run, but the spirits seemed to be everywhere. They were blocking our path, and they were getting closer and closer. We could feel their cold hands on our skin, and we could see the terror in our friends' faces. We knew that we had to find a way to escape, but it seemed impossible. The spirits were too strong, and they were determined to make us pay for our mistake. We could feel the weight of the past crushing us, and we knew that we were in grave danger. Just when we thought all hope was lost, we stumbled upon a small chapel hidden deep in the woods. We ran inside, slamming the door shut behind us. We could hear the spirits pounding on the door, trying to get inside. But the chapel seemed to offer some protection, and the spirits were unable to enter. We knew that we had to stay there until dawn, when the spirits would be forced to retreat back to the asylum. We huddled together, listening to the screams and moans of the spirits outside. We knew that we were lucky to be alive, but we were also haunted by the memory of the terrifying experience we had. We vowed to never forget the lessons we had learned, and we knew that we would never be the same again. Whispers in the darkness. It was a dark and stormy night, and I found myself alone in an old, abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town. The wind howled outside, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I decided to explore the mansion, and as I made my way through the dusty, cobweb-filled rooms, I couldn't help but feel like I was being followed. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind, set my heart racing. As I entered the basement, I heard a faint whispering coming from the shadows. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't make out the words, but the voice was filled with malice and hatred. Suddenly, a hand reached out from the darkness and grabbed me. I screamed, but the sound was drowned out by a deafening roar. I was pulled into the shadows, and I knew that I was never going to make it out of this mansion alive. The darkness closed in around me, and I felt something cold and clammy wrap around my throat. I knew that this was the end, that I was going to die alone in this terrifying place. But just as I felt the life draining out of me, I heard a voice in my ear. "Wake up," it said. "It's just a nightmare." I sat up, drenched in sweat, realizing that it had all been just a dream. But even as I lay back down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me, waiting for me to fall asleep so it could claim me for its own. I tried to shake off the remnants of the nightmare and tell myself it was just my imagination getting the better of me. But as I lay in bed, trying to go back to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still in the room with me. I got up and decided to explore the mansion again, this time with a flashlight in hand. As I walked through the halls, I could hear the sound of faint laughter coming from somewhere deep within the house. I followed the sound, my heart racing with fear. The laughter grew louder and louder, until it was right behind me. I turned around, but there was no one there. I was alone in the darkness, with only the sound of the storm outside and the laughter echoing in my ears. I quickly made my way back to my room, but as I tried to shut the door, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I turned around and found myself face to face with a ghostly figure, its eyes filled with malice and hate. I screamed and tried to run, but the ghost was too fast. It grabbed me and pulled me into the darkness. I could feel its cold embrace as it dragged me deeper and deeper into the shadows. I don't know how long I was lost in the darkness, but when I finally woke up, I was lying in a hospital bed with no memory of how I got there. The doctors told me that I had been found wandering the streets, ranting and raving about ghosts in an old abandoned mansion. But I know what I saw and what I felt that night. And I can never forget the terror that I experienced in that old, abandoned mansion. It's a night that will haunt me for the rest of my life. I was released from the hospital a few days later, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still following me. I would catch glimpses of a ghostly figure in the corner of my eye, and I could still hear the sound of that haunting laughter. I tried to tell my friends and family about my experience, but they just thought I was imagining things. They told me that the stress of being alone in an abandoned mansion had gotten to me, and that I should put it behind me and move on. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it. I knew that there was something in that mansion that was still after me. I had to find out what it was. I decided to go back to the mansion and get to the bottom of things. I went back to the mansion alone, determined to find out what was happening. As I entered the mansion, I could feel the presence of something evil. I searched the mansion, room by room. As I entered the basement, I saw the ghostly figure again. This time, it was more vivid and clearer. It had a face, a body, and it was pointing to a door. I opened the door and I saw a room full of antiques and old furniture. But what caught my attention was an old diary that was lying on the table. I opened the diary and I read the last entry. "I'm sorry, my dear, I can't take it anymore. I can't take the laughter and the whispering anymore. I hope you can forgive me. I had to end it. I realized that the ghostly figure was the ghost of the former owner. It was trying to communicate something to me. I left the mansion and never went back. But I knew that the ghost had finally found peace and I was finally able to move on. The experience changed me. It made me believe in the supernatural and opened my mind to the possibilities of what might be out there. And I knew that I would never be the same again.